face, turned around, went back, and took his place in the line. Well, in today's biblical story that we're going to be studying together, Jesus pretty much asked his guys the same question. Do you know who I am? Now, of course, he didn't say it trying to throw his weight around or, because he wanted them to do something for him or because he didn't really know who he was or, anything like that. But, he asked basically that question. Do you know my identity? Do you know who I am? Now, you can imagine with a name like David Johnson, identity is an important thing to me because there are millions of David Johnsons out there. The Indianapolis phone book has pages, if there was such a phone book. I don't think there is anymore, but if there was, there would be pages and pages and pages of people named David Johnson. And when I got hired to my new job, they told me, okay, your email address is going to be david.johnson4 because there are 3 others working in the company. 2 of them had the same middle initial that I do. That's a problem. But that's my story. That's the story of my life, right? That's what it is. When our 2 boys were born, we thought, okay, let's come up with a name that will be a little bit unique, a little bit different, that we haven't really heard a lot, because, that way they would have quite the same problem. But both of them, the first time we took them to the pediatrician, they said, now when you call in, be sure you give their middle name, because you know how that sentence ended, right? Identity is an important thing, but Jesus' identity is the most important thing. When he said, who do people say that I am? And do you know who I really am? It's a significant, important, vital question because everything rises or falls with who Jesus is. His identity is the key. Now, today's passage in our study of Peter, I know it's been a couple weeks, but we're still studying Peter, okay? But today's lesson shows him at his best and at his worst in the same day. That kind of lets us relate to Peter, doesn't it? His life was kind of like a roller coaster. He'd be up on top and everything's great, and then suddenly, swoosh, down the hill he goes, and not so good. Does that remind you of anybody? Maybe yourself? Does me. One minute he's making a bold proclamation of his faith in Jesus Christ, but the next minute Jesus has to rebuke Peter and calls him a stumbling block. But today's passage that we're going to be studying reminds us who Jesus really is. And it begins with an important question. Now, even though Jesus asked this question a long, long time ago, it's still vital. And we still have to make a decision about the answer. Because who Jesus is makes all the difference in how you live and how you relate to other people and how you relate to God. Because who Jesus is the foundation for our faith. Right? It's the key to Christianity. And it all comes down to that question. Who is Jesus? And so Jesus asked this question. And one thing that made it an important question was where he asked it. In verse 13, Matthew tells us that Jesus had his disciples up in the region of Caesarea Philippi. Now, you probably haven't studied your Bible geography very much, and neither have I. But I do happen to know that Caesarea Philippi was way up north, really on the kind of the borderline, or maybe just across the borderline from a Jewish area into a more Gentile area. So it's interesting that Jesus took his disciples kind of out of their comfort zone, if you will, out of the area to be able to have this confab with his fellows. And so here he is, Caesarea Philippi. Now, something else you may need to know about this area is it was a center for pagan idol worship. There were multiple temples and shrines here to various gods. Here was a shrine to Baal, the Canaanite god. And it was also a center of worship, the kind of cult that believed Caesar, whoever the Caesar was, whoever the king was at the time, was actually a god. Hence the name of the town. Caesarea, or Caesar Philippi. So there was a lot of pagan worship here. And it may be that Jesus had his guys up on a hillside, and you could see some of these other idols and some of these other temples around. It's on the slope of Mount Hermon. And you know, so here they are. And Jesus, surrounded by Gentiles, surrounded by these idols, says, what are people saying about me? Or to be more accurate, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Now, don't let that title, Son of Man, throw you. A lot of people see Jesus calls himself Son of Man, and they're like, well, Jesus never claimed to be God. Look at that. He says, I'm the Son of Man. But what you need to understand is that title, Son of Man, is actually a messianic title. Well, way back in Psalm 80, Psalm 80 refers to the Son of Man as being God who comes down to earth. And back in Daniel, chapter 7, verse 13, Daniel says he has a vision, and in the vision there's one like a Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, who's given authority and glory and power, and all nations and all languages would worship him. So Son of Man has a prophetic kind of connection, and it refers to the Messiah, the Christ, the one who God had sent. Now, the disciples, if you notice their responses, they were kind of gentle with Jesus. Because the only responses they give are positive responses. Well, some say that you're Elijah, and some say that you're John the Baptist, and some say that you're Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Now, all those have good backgrounds, reasons that they use to say, well, this is what people were saying about him, but that's not really what we're going to go into today. It's an excellent study, though, if you'd like to do it sometime. But notice they told him only positive things. That doesn't mean only positive things were being said about Jesus, right? I think you probably know enough Bible to know that. Some of the people were saying, you know, this guy he's a danger. This guy is a friend of sinners. This guy eats with people and touches people and does things for people who we wouldn't touch, who we wouldn't go near. He's a friend of sinners. On one occasion, they even accused him of being in league with Beelzebul, the prince of demons. So, you know, they were saying he's in partnership with the devil. But they didn't say that. So it's interesting what they said, but that's not really the crucial question. You know, that was just kind of a warm-up question Jesus was asking to get them thinking. He wanted to see what they would say, what they would come up with. And then, I kind of think he looked at them very intently and said, but what about you? Who do you say I am? And in my imagination, I can imagine him really emphasizing, who do you say I am? Because you see, that's what happens to all of us. It doesn't matter what other people are saying about Jesus. It doesn't. It doesn't matter what your friends say or what your enemies say. It doesn't matter what anybody else says about Jesus. But what matters is, what do you say? What do you believe? Who do you think Jesus is? And so, you know, the first question was kind of informational. The second question is personal. What do you think? It's easy to repeat what other people say, right? But then Jesus says, what about you? And that's the key question, isn't it? Who's Jesus? Some would say, well, he's a great teacher. He's a good moral teacher. You should follow his teachings. Other people would say, well, he must have been an angel or something to do the things that he did. But, he's superior to being a human, but he's not really God. Others would say, well, he just came to be an example. He just came to show us how to live, but nothing more. But you know what? It doesn't really matter what most people or some people say. What matters is, what do you say? Who do you say that he is? So Jesus asks this question. I wonder how long that question kind of hung there in the air. Some people assume that Peter immediately jumped in and said what he said. Other people kind of think, well, maybe they kind of thought for a while. And maybe Jesus, one by one, would look in the eyes of each of his disciples. Who do you say that I am? But finally, good old Peter, who, he was the kind of guy who just blurted out whatever was on his mind. And this time it was good, right? Verse 16 says, Simon Peter says, well, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. Now, that word, Messiah, is a Hebrew word. The actual word in Matthew is actually the word Christos. So, you are the Christ. Those two words mean the same thing. Those aren't two names for Jesus. They're titles. And it means one who is anointed, the anointed of God. So he is the one that they've been waiting for. So Simon Peter says, you are the Messiah. You are, and then he added, you are the Son of the living God. Now Peter had reached a conclusion that Jesus wasn't any of the things other people were saying about him. He had decided Jesus is not just a prophet. He's not just a good teacher. He's not just a miracle worker. He believed he is the only begotten, the Son of God, the Messiah. And with those words, Peter declared, you know what, Jesus, I believe that you are God in the flesh here on earth. You are divine. How do you suppose Peter arrived at that conclusion? How did he decide that? Well, we know that he had been with Jesus. He'd been walking with him, following him. So we know that he had heard Jesus teach. He had been there at the Sermon on the Mount and heard that marvelous sermon. He'd been there on many occasions when Jesus taught, when he had interactions with the Pharisees, and he could handle every question or every response that they had. He had been there, and he had seen all kinds of diseases being healed, the lame, the blind, the deaf, the mute. He heard all of them, or he saw all of them being healed by Jesus. And in some cases, Jesus didn't even have to go. He saw dead people being raised back to life. Jesus, he was there when he took those loaves and fish and fed 5,000 plus people, and then later 4,000 plus people. He had seen Jesus walking on the water, and even more, Jesus had said, come, and he had begun to walk out there to him. Wow. He had been there when Jesus just said, peace, be still, and a storm was calmed, and that ferocious storm just went away. Is it any wonder, really, that when Jesus said, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter responded and said, I know who you are. You're the Messiah. You're the Son of God. And Peter's answer received an immediate approval by Jesus. Verse 16, Peter said, I know who you are. You're the Messiah, the Son of God. And then in verse 17, Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. So Jesus endorses Peter's statement as being true. So Jesus says, right you are, Peter. That is who I am. Exactly. That's who I am. But then even more. He said, here's the source. This wasn't revealed by men. This was revealed by God the Father. Now, this is one thing that set Jesus apart from other religious leaders and teachers. You know, Jesus accepted worship. He accepted being called the Son of God. And you know, other places in the Bible, when somebody would try to worship, you know, Paul or one of the other apostles or whatever, or even an angel, they would say, no, don't bow down to me. Don't worship me. I'm just a man. Or, you know, I'm not the Lord. You need to follow the Lord. But Jesus accepted that praise and that worship and that adulation as something that he was worthy of. And that's different, see? That's different. He accepted the title Son of God as being true. Not only that, but when he talks about the source, he says this was revealed to you by God. Now, none of us here were able to hear Jesus teaching with our own ears, and we weren't able to witness his miracles, but we can read other who witnessed those and read their accounts, and we can see, in our life, we have to make a choice. We have to make a decision. And so when Jesus looks at us and says, well, what about you? What do you think? Who do you say that I am? We have to make a decision. Author C.S. Lewis wrote that we can't try and adopt the position that Jesus was just a great teacher or just a good example or just a special being, but not God. He says, Jesus won't let us do that. He claimed to be much more. And when Jesus endorsed Peter's statement, he was saying, that's exactly right. That is who I am. I'm the Savior of the world. And we've either got to accept that or we reject that. Those are our choices. We can't be in the middle. We can't be on the fence. It's one or the other. Jesus went on and said, Peter, this is my rock upon which I'm going to build my church. It's the foundation for the church. It's the foundation for the Christian faith. Now, there are some people who would believe that Peter was the rock that Jesus was talking about. That Peter was the rock upon which the church is built. And that's not true for a lot of reasons that we could go into that I really don't want to take the time to do right now. But what Jesus was talking about is this statement of his identity. That is the foundation for the faith. Who Jesus is the rock upon which our church is built. And if at any point you're in any church that stops being focused on Jesus and his word, then you get out of there. Because you're not in a Christian church anymore. It has to focus on Jesus. Focus on his word. That is truth. And that's why 1 Corinthians 3:11 says, no one can lay any foundation than the one that is already laid, Jesus Christ. So far, Peter's having a pretty good day, isn't he? To be given a pat on the back by Jesus, you're right. Blessed are you, Peter, for saying that. Unfortunately, we come to the next section where we find an impertinent disagreement. Now, this whole section is a turning point in Jesus' mission. I mean, if you've got the scripture open there, you'll see that verse 21 says, from that time, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he had to go to Jerusalem, he was going to be handed over, even that he was going to die. So beginning at this time, Jesus becomes much more open with his disciples and says, guys, this is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to be taken, and I'm going to, he's talking about his death. And then verse 22 tells us that good old Peter took him aside and began to rebuke Jesus, and saying, never, Lord, this is not going to happen to you. Peter didn't like that kind of talk. He didn't like that talk about Jesus dying. Does this seem strange to you? In verse 16, Peter was making this declaration of faith, and then just a couple of verses later, Peter argues with Jesus and says, Jesus, this is not the way it's going to be. He is trying to correct Jesus. Does that sound weird to you? It may sound weird, but it should be very familiar because people do this all the time. With their lips, they say Jesus is Lord, but sometimes with their lips and sometimes with their life, they don't act like it. They contradict Jesus. They say, no, yes, you're Lord, but it's not going to be the way you want it, Jesus. It's going to be on my terms. And so people say, yes, Jesus is Lord, but if Jesus wants your resources, or if he wants you to use your talents, or if whatever, if he wants more of your time, whatever it may be, we say, never, Lord, not so, Lord. It's not going to be that way. Or Jesus says, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. And we say, Lord, I can't trust you to provide for me. I got to do it myself. That's just a couple of the many examples. And so 5 verses in our Bible, after commending Peter for his bold confession of faith, Jesus turns around and rebukes Peter for what he said. And so in verse 23, Jesus says, he turns and says to Peter, you need to get behind me, Satan. I bet that got Peter's attention pretty quick, didn't it? You are a stumbling block to me because you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Wow. Today we would say, you're kind of harsh there, Jesus. That's kind of narrow-minded, isn't it? Well, he says, Peter, you're acting just like Satan to me right now. I can't listen to that kind of talk. I can't abide that. And anytime you hear yourself saying or thinking, no, Lord, it's not going to be that way. Never, Lord. That should throw up a red flag in your mind immediately. And you might want to say, wait a minute. Or maybe, since it's the first Sunday of the NFL, a penalty flag comes out, right? And you need to think, wait a minute. What kind of behavior am I exhibiting here? I'm saying Jesus is Lord, but I'm not letting him be Lord. Because the word translated Lord, let me just read a definition for you. A Lord is someone to whom a person or thing belongs, about which he has the power to decide. The master, the owner, the one in control. And so a Lord is somebody you obey when you want to and when you don't want to. If you are his follower, Jesus said you gotta be willing to take up his cross and follow him. And then look at the trade. He said, well, what good is it for a man if he gains the whole world but forfeits his soul? Or what good can you give in exchange for your soul? The Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he'll reward each person for what he has done. Without Jesus, without following Jesus, we have no hope. Plain and simple. Now, I can't let you leave until I make 2 very important applications, or 2 takeaways I'd like you to think about. They're pretty simple. It's not going to take a long time. Number 1, a follower of Jesus needs to let Jesus lead. Jesus isn't interested in taking our suggestions.